Welcome back to the Forensics Unplugged channel, guys. Please subscribe if you've not already done so. Today we're doing a video on polishing pads. We're going to try and do it in one take, minimal editing. You know the score. This video is about removing some of the complexity around you picking what type of pad you should use for your machine polisher, and there is a bucket load of complexity. That's the bad news when you're first starting out. Once you've been doing it for a while, you get your head around all the sizes and formats. First thing I'm going to talk very quickly in this video. First thing is, if you're polishing at home, I'm going to recommend, like most people, that you use foam pads because it's harder to maintain wool and microfiber pads at home without air lines. So we're talking about foam pads. That would be my recommendation for you. Now, before we get on to talking about pads, I'm just going to move the camera on the fly, which is never good, so you can see all these different types of machine polishers here, okay? Now, first of all, very few of you are going to be using rotary polishers, but we need to talk about them for a second. A rotary polisher will have a 150mm plate, 125mm plate, 75mm plate, and a little, I believe this is a 40, that's a 35mm plate, I believe. Some of my little measurements might be wrong because there's so many things here. But you can see those different sizes of plates, okay? So if you're a rotary user, you have a different set of considerations potentially to fulfill what you need in terms of pad size. Very important. Stick with me. I know it sounds obvious, but it's important to do this. Now, 99% of you at home are going to be using something like this, a DAS Pro Plus or an 8mm offset DA, and 99% of you are going to have a 125mm plate on there, and probably 99% of you are going to have a smaller plate that can go on to your, you can fit onto your DAS 6 Pro. Now, the smaller plates come in two sizes, 75mm, which you can see here, and I believe this one here is an 80mm pad, so it's slightly larger. So you always check the size of your smaller pads. The chemical guys pads we'll talk about later on fit onto these larger 80mm ones. That's why I've got that particular plate. And you can also see, guys, another option here, that if you're a long throw user, okay, so we have, say, a 15mm long throw DA with a 125mm plate, and then we have our little PXE machine, which has a 75mm plate in DA mode, but then also supports a 35mm plate. So I've just thrown a whole ton of sizes at you there, guys. The key thing to understand with standard plate sizes, 99% of you are going to be using 125mm plates, possibly with a smaller 75mm option that you can fit onto your machine, but the requirements are different. So when I'm talking about recommendations, the reason this is all relevant is you're all going to have different requirements, and it makes it very, very, very complicated, but depending on what set of machines you're using and your approach. Okay, the next thing is, now the good news is I'm going to simplify everything for you. Simplify, like, what's that game? What's that game with Philip Schofield? The Cube. I'm going to use a simplify. I've explored every pad known to man or beast. Literally, we looked at a fair amount, guys, and if I haven't come across the best pads on the market by now, then I've not done a good job. Anyway, crack on with it. My brain's wandering. Right, quite simply, what I use, guys, and what I tend to recommend, and why I tend to recommend them. You can see down here, these are the Flex pad range that are relatively new. And straight away, it looks so simple, doesn't it? You've got pads to interface with the 150mm plates. You've got pads to interface with the 125mm plates, pads to interface with 75mm plates, and pads to interface with the tiny 35mm plates. So straight away, this scenario, boom, 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 is catered for, and I can use those Flex pads with my Flex rotaries. No surprises there, really. It's important to understand that, though. There are very few pads on the market that have that full range. I can barely think of any. Even if I took the Rupes pads, for example, that have all those different sizes, primarily they're cone pads, especially down at those small sizes that aren't even really great on the rotary. So there's all sorts of little subtle considerations like this. But straight away, that flex pad caters for what I want to do on my rotaries. Now we have an extreme cut, the green one, which is a very aggressive pad, and you won't often need to use that. It's stiff, it's coarse, it's really wide poured, and you'll get a lot of vibration back through the machine when you're cutting, especially on the DA, because of how stiff it is. Generally, you can do most of your cutting on these purples. These purples are probably one of the best cutting pads that I've ever used. In fact, if you had to say, what's your favourite pad of all time, it's the Flex Purple. You can hammer the crap out of that pad, and it doesn't seem to overheat and crumble, especially on the rotary when you're, or even on the DA, when you're really overworking the pads, you've abused them, that's when a pad will fail on you. And typically nowadays it will fail by crumbling and delaminating on the surface. I've not seen a pad that can take a hammering like the Flex Purples, with the exception of one other pad, the Shoal Concept Purple, which seems identical to me. After that, so you have that purple pad, which you can use for most cutting and also one staging. This pad is soft enough and fine enough that it actually finishes down quite nicely as well, which is always nice on a cutting pad. The green pad, you could never finish paint with that, it's so aggressive. The orange pad is your bulk standard polishing pad, and your red pad is the ultra soft finishing pad. So if you're on a budget and you want to just simplify, you can go with purple for cutting and one staging, and orange for polishing. Okay, or if you're ultra simple, you could just go with the purple, though that's going to introduce constraints. So consider the flex pads. If you're just a normal DA user, DAS 6, whatever it is, you know, 8mm free spinning DA, consider just using flex purples for your cutting on there on your 125mm plate and the polishing. And if you get the smaller 75mm plate, you can use these 75mm pads for that. This is an 80mm plate, so it's a little bit big for my pads. I said it was complicated, but I also, as well as being able to use these on my rotary, of course you can see that they are perfect for this combo of either the XCE forced rotation or XFE free spinning long throw and the PXE. I can just pair that set of pads up with this, that set of pads up with this, and I can change adapters on this, which if you've not seen is very clever, off with the 75mm, on with the rotary attachment. Why is that not fitting in? There we go. And then use these. So there you go. What a system this is, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on using, this combination of tools, okay, because I think that's a fantastic combo paired up with the flex pads. Very simple to follow. Okay, not all of you are going to be using these flex pads and flex machines because they are quite expensive. Now, that leads us on to the negatives with the flex pads, guys, and it is a real consideration, a big consideration. They're expensive. I think they're like 11 or 12 quid, maybe even more for these 125mm pads. You're not going to go any bigger. That's expensive. When you buy these pads, I believe the price, you get 2 in the pack, and the price comes down. They're actually decent value then, but they're quite expensive. I wish these pads were less than £10, but they're not, so that's the downside. They do last longer, but I'm trying to give you the negatives of all this stuff as well. So quite simply, they're expensive. The only other pads which I rate that I value or rate as being as good as the flex pads are the Shoal Concepts Spider range, which you can see here. And they have a white cutting pad, extremely coarse. It's basically like the green. It's not exactly the same as the green, but very similar to the green. It's actually dual core. It's even harder than the green because of that dense black layer. They have an additional cutting pad there, which is a really strange cutting pad, but it's an amazing cutting pad. One of the finest pores on a cutting pad I've ever seen, but it's really hard. Then they have the awesome purples, mid-range. Then they have the polishing, and then they have this ultra soft black waffle, which is a finishing pad. Very fine. You have to be careful with that. It can clog up, so you don't want to do any cutting with that. Just muck spreading, you know, putting a sealant on or something like that. And the Shell Concepts you can also get in these smaller sizes, to fit the 75mm. Now the bad news is the Shell Concept, as far as I know, doesn't have the spot pads. So I talked about, it's all about constraints. So for me, I can't use the Shell Concept pads because they've got no tiny spot pads. So it's just a big showstopper for me. Okay, I've not even talked about the shape of the pads either. One good thing about the shape of these flex pads, they're almost like cones. Almost, but they're also kind of flat walled to a point. So they're quite cleverly shaped. That means they need to be flat, these pads up primarily. But you can use them on rotaries, no problem. You can also use them on dual action and forced rotation. They just about work. These pads are kind of inverted, the Shell Concepts ones, which is great for rotary, not so good for dual action machines in my opinion. It's just an interesting thing. I'm not overly keen on all of the little slats that they cut in there. There's so many factors, guys, and so many personal preference things. The green flex pad also has the slats, but the rest of the flex pads don't have the cuts, and I don't want the cuts. So that's why I use flex over Shell Concepts, because I can get this spot pad. The range is smaller, more simple, it's slightly cheaper, and the purple and the orange, which are my primary workhorses, don't have cuts in them. Right, we need to crack on. I'm spending a lot of time. This is really important information, even though it doesn't sound like it. The next thing down here, probably all out of focus, is you can see the old Chemical Guys hex-logic pads. Let's just fold that so I'm not staring at myself. Stare at the lens, John. Stare at the lens. Hello. Right. Here you can see these. Now these are the most popular pads. Anyone that sells ranges of pads, this will always be their best seller, I'm told. Now to understand the Chemical Guys hex-logic pads is quite simple. Well, actually it's not that simple. You've got yellow, they're heavy cutting, orange, they're medium cutting, green, they're light cutting, heavy polishing. You know, you're working your way up. White polishing, blue light polishing, black finishing, red ultra finishing. It's too many for me, but it's fine. I'd rather have too many. I don't have to buy them all. I would forget about the blue. I would almost, you can almost forget about the orange as well. Their most aggressive pad, I'm telling you, they describe it as really aggressive. It's not that aggressive. That is the great thing about the Chemical Guys hex-logic range, is you're never really gonna, even with this very aggressive cutting pad, you're not going to introduce a lot of machine marring, in my opinion, unless something's really going crazy, you know, especially on a dual action. So they're very user-friendly, safe pads to start polishing with. Now, you can see these standard hex-logics are flat-walled. They do the quantum ones, which are specifically designed for longer throw machines. Now, before we get onto the quantum ones, hex-logic also give you the smaller pads, but these are not 75mm pads. So if you're using one of DA, I would suggest you have an 80mm. I think I've got the size right. The larger backing plate, so it fits these perfectly. Okay. You're going to have to go and do a little bit of research yourself. I'm just telling you about some of the pitfalls. Also, the smaller range, the 75mm range, they don't have all the red, the blue, you know. I think they just do black, white, green and orange. And I don't think they even do the yellow. Let me know on that. That's a little bit annoying, that is, because I can't follow suit with the smaller pads against the large ones. They might have changed it around. Now, the bad news is, if you want to go with the quantum hex-logics, which are these sidewall ones with a hole in the middle to go on long throws, they don't sell you the mini pad version of them. So that's why I'm moving away from the hex-logics. They're not giving me what I want, and I've got no mini option as well. But they're a great pad, and I understand. You know, I've got tons of them there. They're really good pads. So they're about £8 or £9. You've got, you know, I've said the advantages and disadvantages, nothing too coarse in there. So they're a good pad to start off with. If you don't overuse them and overwork them, you know, really force them into the paint. Once the pad starts sticking, especially on a DA, it's not moving over freely and you're pressuring in, all of the energy on the machine is going to go into the foam. You're going to heat up the backing very quickly, or you're going to rip the surface of the pad and you're going to destroy them in seconds. And it's usually 99% of the time when you destroy a pad quickly, it's poor technique, not the fault of the pad. They are only made of foam, glue and Velcro backing, guys. What do you expect? I'm going off on one there, and I'm going off on one. Next up, guys, Rupes pads. Now, the very cool thing about Rupes pads is they do the little tiny pads. I'm just taking a different pad from another manufacturer just to give you an idea. So Rupes sell you the tiny ones that you can use on a nano machine, or I could use on my Flex, you know, my Flex PXE. They then sell you, I think they also do well, this is a 75mm plate, so you can also use them on your DA, you know, on a 75mm plate on your DA, or my little 75mm plate for my PXE. So it's great. So that's the main thing with Rupes. They have you covered on the size. They also have you covered on the price, which is very important. These Rupes pads, you can get the 125mm standard cones for, I believe, between £6 and £7 in the UK. A lot of professionals use them for that reason. They are not Chinese pads. It's another big discussion on pads is whether they come from China or not. You know, you want to get European-made pads. If you're buying European-made pads, you might be prepared to pay the money because of the quality. If it's Chinese-made, I believe the pad... If Rupes can sell you these pads for £6 to £7 in the UK, then in my opinion, a Chinese-made pad should be about £4 to £5, but they're not. These are as cheap as any Chinese paddle, with the exceptions of those really cheap SPTA ones. So that's fantastic, very viable. Because of that, loads of people use them. So we're covered on price, we're covered on all of the size ranges. Now it's just the different types of pad. Blue heavy cut, green medium cut, yellow one stage and polishing, and white ultra fine finishing. Now the problem is there's always so much complexity. That is with these thick pads. Rupes also do the thin ones, and they don't have the green pads in the thin range. Now, the disadvantage of the Rupes pads is I personally find this blue pad overly coarse. Really needs, once you start getting a bit of heat into it, you know, it's okay. But again, there are pads, it's no worse really, or not much worse than my Flex green. So it's not that bad, but it's even coarser in my opinion. I also find their green pad really coarse. Now, the one thing I noticed with the Rupes pads personally is that the surface of the Rupes pad delaminates faster than my Flex pads or my Shoal Concept pads. So there's the positives and there's the negatives. These Rupes pads though, guys, are very, very viable, and the price is phenomenal. That's why a lot of people use them, and you might want to consider them. Really good. You know, for all of the faults, they're still virtually, you know, near as damn it half the price of the ones that I'm using. Now I'm just going to move the camera over a little bit more. Stick with me, guys. We're nearly there. We're nearly there. And all the stuff I'm recommending you is the best of the best that you might want to kind of have a look at. Now, we're out of focus. Don't worry about that. Where's my hand? Everything's reversed. There it is. So this range of pads along here is the Zvizzer or Zvizzer, whatever they're called. Zvizzer, I think it is. And it's very simple. Blue for heavy cut, I think, if I've got this. I'm doing this from memory. Red for pretty heavy cut. So mega heavy cut, pretty heavy cut, one staging, medium cut, polishing, light finishing. So 5 different pad choices. They also have you covered on size through from the little tiny spot pads, you know, for the spot machines, through to the 75mm, through to the 125mm. I believe they also have 150mm DA pads, I think. They also, if we look at this, so we'll just put this green one on the top as well so you can see the kind of full range. These top three are your cone pads, if you like, so they're like for DAs. And then you have standard pucks, you know, discs for rotaries or force rotation or DA if you like, but you probably want to go with these for dual action. And then they have your mega thin pads as well, which a lot of people like on force rotation on the 3401. They fit perfectly on the old 3401. This is 140mm backing size, so I wonder if they'll change that for the new XCE, the 3401 replacement. I said there was lots of complexity, didn't I? There is. The claim to fame of the Zvizzer pads, guys, is a fantastic price point. Bet they're priced similar to the Rupes. These thin pads I think you can get for like £4 or £5, which phenomenal. You won't get any cheaper than that. These Zvizzer pads don't last, in my opinion, as long as the Flex Purples or the Flex pads generally, but then they're a fraction of the price. They're European made, they're high quality pads, and they're worth a look because of the price and the fact you're covered. So Rupes and Zvizzer are ones that you want to really think long and hard about. And I'm going to go on to the final option now, guys, and you can see them down here. Let's just shuffle this across. Now these are the new Koch pads. Now you have red rated heavy cut, yellow rated medium cut, purple rated finishing. So that's abrasives. They've color coded their pads to match heavy cut, medium, polishing, you know, anti-hologramming as they call it. You have the giant 150mm, you know, 6-inch pads. You have the 125mm, which are the ones you're interested in. I believe, this is really important, but I believe they have 75mm pads as well. I need to check that. I'm going to just go out on a limb and say these might be the highest quality pads I've ever seen. The cut on them is superb. I mean, they've got this weird little trough around them. Primarily they're for DAs, so that might cause me a problem if I wanted to use them with rotaries. You could use them on rotaries, but the shape of them tells me that they're more for the kind of dual action polishers, which is kind of interesting. Really, really high quality. The bad news is they are very, very expensive pads. I think they're about £14. Check the price, which is a real shame. That's the reason I don't use them. But I always tell people you need to check them out. This is the biggest problem, isn't it? My favourite ones are more expensive. I mean, you're looking at £14 versus about £7 for the equivalent, you know. So you can have twice as many pads. Will the Koch pads last twice as long as a Zvizzer pad or a Rupes pad? I don't know, actually. I don't know what the durability of these Koch pads are like, but they are amazing quality, and it's very simple when you pair them up with the system what to use. Another reason I don't use them, or I can't, is I don't think they do the tiny little spot pads for the rotary, you know, or my little PXE, the tiny pads like this, and that's a showstopper for me. So let's bring the camera back out, guys. They are really all of the pads that I would suggest you look at, and you can see why I use the flex pads now, because they are the only ones, with exception, well, not the only ones, but they fit exactly what I need my pads to do. I can work them on any machine. I've got all the sizes, and they are, I think, probably the best pads on the market, in my opinion. The downside is they're a little bit more expensive, but you have a whole ton of constraints when you're doing this, and it's especially the more polishes you have. So when you suddenly start looking at all of the range of options that are available to you and which ones actually fulfill your requirements, you're left with very few options. In fact, in my instance, I'm only left with Zvizzer, Rupes and Flex as the only ones that can give me the full range. The shapes of the Zvizzer ones, they don't fit with what I need quite so well. Although they kind of do, they're viable. The Rupes, again, the shapes of these particular pads, I can't remember if Rupes just do normal rotary ones. I'm not sure. I think they do I don't think they do, but I could be wrong on that. Whereas these, I can use them for any machines. There's only 4. They're good. I really, as a guy at home, don't really need those green pads. I would probably get the reds personally. These 3 would probably be fine for me. I can hammer the shit, if you pardon my French, out of an abrasive with these purple pads and do heavy cutting with them if I need to. Remarkable, those purple pads. That's it for this one. Sorry if it's an information overload. I get asked a lot about pads, and you know, it's complicated, and hopefully this video will give you an idea of what to use. Let me know in the comments other pad options which you think work for you. There's millions, and I'm looking over to my right. I can see pads from Lake Country, I can see pads from Forekla and stuff like that I've tested, but for me they don't fit my requirements because of all the sizes and stuff like that, as I've explained, so I can't use those ones. But it's all about finding a pad which you're happy with, and I hope this video is useful. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon on the Forensics Detailing channel. Bye for now.
Holding on to what I knew, but the moment's gone. Where was I when